Cedar Point is 152 years old. That is 1.5 centuries. In all that time, you're bound to go through so many changes and transformations, but I think we can agree that the vast majority of those changes have been for the good, because as we sit here today in 2022, if you're a roller coaster fan that's never been to Cedar Point, I don't care where you are in this world, Cedar Point is your #1 bucket list park. For you to build that kind of reputation and build that kind of status across the world, all those good things have to fall into place. Those good things could have easily been bad things. That great roller coaster could have easily been a bad roller coaster. All sorts of things, not only good decisions, but a lot of good luck, a lot of just dumb luck, and that's what Cedar Point has had in all this time. But that leads you to really think, what if? What if this was built instead of that? What if this happened instead of this? What if you turned right instead of left? What could have happened? So that is what this video is all about. We're taking the greatest what ifs in Cedar Point history.
In 1870, Cedar Point began as a simple beach and bathhouse. That's really all it was for 12 years, until 8 new bathhouses and a dance hall were built in 1882. A small peninsula right off the shore in Lake Erie in a small town called Sandusky, Ohio. This sounds like a perfect place for a nice little beach, but it kept growing. In 1888, bowling alleys, a large grand pavilion, and dining options were added, making this place more than just your regular beach. 4 years later, in 1892, things will change forever. Cedar Point opens their first ever roller coaster, the 25-foot tall, 10 miles an hour Switchback Railway. Cedar Point was extremely successful and popular before this attraction, so they really didn't need it. So that leads to a question: what if? What if Cedar Point never took the plunge for that first coaster? Does that mean the second one in 1902 wouldn't have been built? Does that mean the Cedar Point we know and love today would have never existed? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. But what if that first step was never taken? What if?
Next in line for the biggest what ifs in Cedar Point history has to come in the mid-1950s. This was a time when Cedar Point was not doing well financially, and a lot of the owners were looking to get rid of their shares as quickly as possible. At that time, you also had 2 groups that were interested in buying Cedar Point. You had the state of Ohio, and you had a private developer. But the thing is, Ohio didn't want to buy Cedar Point and keep the amusement park. They wanted to buy it and turn it into a large state park, all 400 acres on the peninsula. And the private developer, he wanted to tear down Cedar Point and build luxury housing. So here you had 3 entities. One of them didn't want anything to do with Cedar Point. One wanted it to be luxury housing, and the other wanted it to be a large state park. Now, how on earth did Cedar Point ever survive this? And it's some of that dumb luck I was talking about before, because, it really, if you think about it, Cedar Point should not exist today after all that. The state of Ohio really pushed to get that land, and they really wanted to buy it. But after like a year or so of the process, a lot of lawmakers, especially down in southern Ohio and the Cincinnati area, they started to sour on the idea because they felt like, hey, why should Ohio spend all this money on something that's only going to be able to be used for northern Ohio residents? The state of Ohio slowly backed out, and it kind of fizzled away, and the private developer, George Roos, ended up buying Cedar Point. Now, you might ask, why didn't it ever become the luxury housing like he wanted? Well, lucky for us, all the Cedar Point fans out there, he did a complete 180. When he bought the park, he no longer wanted to tear it down, but he saw the possibility of turning it into a Disney of the Midwest. His role in Cedar Point lasted all the way until 1977, when he retired at the age of 81. Now granted, during this time, Cedar Point didn't blossom into the record-breaking roller coaster capital that it is today, but he deserves a lot of credit, because if he didn't decide to keep it an amusement park and decided to make it housing, we wouldn't have what we have today. So what if Cedar Point got turned into a state park or got turned into housing. Who knows if the coaster wars would have ever started? Who knows all the trickle-down effect that would have happened on all these other parks across the country? And it would have just been, just a huge loss and a huge disaster. One that most of us probably would have never even knew existed because most of us weren't even born by that time. In 1989, Cedar Point launched the first attack in what would be known as the Coaster Wars. Taller, faster, and steeper was the goal, and beating your competition was the only concern. The proverbial missile in this war was the Magnum XL-200. The brainchild of then CEO Richard Kinzel, Magnum was intended to be the tallest roller coaster, but it wasn't supposed to be over 200 feet tall. In fact, if not for a board member asking how much more it would cost to make the 187-foot coaster reach the 200-foot mark, Cedar Point may not have been the first to reach 200 feet. What if Magnum XL-200 never existed? And what if they aren't the first to 200 feet? Does this mean that they lose their passion to become the first to 300 feet? To 400 feet? If not for that one question, do the coaster wars never begin? And is the seed for Cedar Point's fascination with breaking records never planted? What if?
In 2006, Cedar Point executives were hard at work planning their next major roller coaster. They finally decided on Maverick for the 2007 season. The question was, which Maverick? Cedar Point was debating on proposals from Intamin to create a low-to-the-ground, intense blitz coaster, or a 200-foot tall B&M floorless. The decision makers were split down the middle on which ride to go with. Obviously, they went with the Intamin blitz coaster, and I think most of us are very grateful for that. Maverick's success was an unofficial end to the coaster wars that they started a couple decades earlier. But what if Cedar Point created a 200-foot floorless instead? A record-breaking ride topping 200 feet may have kept the taller and taller trend going a little longer. And what would have come of Mantis, which was converted to a floorless in 2015? If it was torn down for another ride, it wouldn't have been an Intamin blitz. Cedar Fair had already cut ties with Intamin by this point. Would Mantis still be operating? Would the coaster many enthusiasts view as one of the best rides in the country just not exist? Would Intamin have sold the plans for Maverick to another park? What if?